Welcome everyone, this is Andre's Restart, and today we are talking about the latest details that have come up that may be suggesting the Nintendo Switch 2 specs and this controversy that has been surrounding this. Are these specs to be believed? I'm not so sure, but we're going to be talking about that today. Now, before going forward, let me point out that we are aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers, so if you do enjoy my content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leaving a like is also super helpful. And enjoy the ride as we attempt to talk about Nintendo every day. So before I go into this info, I would like to point out that I don't necessarily believe this info, and you should at least take it with a grain of salt. Look at it critically and decide for yourself. And I will be going into some info that has come up beforehand that contradicts what we're seeing now. But let's talk about this before going into why I think it's wrong. And so this latest info about Switch 2 specs is coming from this Taiwanese economic forum that is suggesting that the Nintendo Switch 2 will have a 120Hz screen, improved battery life, but only 8GB of RAM and 64GB of storage. So obviously, better battery life is better battery life. That's a good thing. That's not cause for controversy. And a 120Hz screen would actually enable for 120 frames per second to be demonstrated on the screen, and Nintendo games don't run at 120 frames per second. Best case scenario, 60, but usually 30, and sometimes not even a stable 30 depending on the game. And so, a 120Hz screen would actually be pretty awesome. However, 8GB of RAM and 64GB of storage is a lot less than expected and could lead to some issues. Only 8GB of RAM could impact a number of things, including demonstrating higher resolutions. With Nvidia advancing their DLSS technology that enables higher resolution and ray tracing and things of this nature, if the Switch 2 only has 8GB of RAM, these benefits might be mitigated somewhat here, and so that might not be the best thing. And I'll also point out that with less RAM, it's even harder to produce better frame rates. So what would even be the point in investing in a higher frame rate capable screen? And in the case of 64GB of storage, well, that's just not a lot. Nintendo's been rocking 32GB for the longest time. They had that for the Wii U, they had that for the base Switch, and it was only for the OLED that they went up to 64, which is an improvement, but still not that much. There are games that are even bigger than 64GB of internal storage, and that 64GB of internal storage, some of that has to be left to the operating system and such. So with there being games out there that straight up can't be stored on the Nintendo Switch without expanding its memory, that's a little bit of a problem. And so for Nintendo to launch their next generation console with just 64GB of internal storage, people are going to be taking issue with that. And so with that all said, let's dive a little bit deeper into this article, and let me explain why I don't think this article is telling us what the Switch 2 will actually be. So keep in mind this is translated, right? So there could be something lost in translation here. But this is how the article opens up. There are rumors in the industry that Japanese game console giant Nintendo is expected to launch a new Switch this year to seize the market. At the same time, in response to pressures such as global inflation and the weak yen, the price of the new product will rise for the first time. The terminal price will rise from US $300 to US $400, an increase of 33%. And so, just from that part right there, keep in mind that this is a site that talks about money, hence the name money.udn.com, and they're going to look at things from the perspective of the market and the yen. But how the article opens up is saying there are rumors, and so they're speaking on the rumors. And there's nothing here that says, we've heard, our sources have told us. But moving on, here's another interesting part. In addition, since the Switch has never undergone a major hardware upgrade since its launch, the market expects that Nintendo is likely to launch a new generation of products in the second half of this year. And some hardware specifications will also evolve, including that the processor will be equipped with Nvidia's T239 chip, equipped with 8GB of RAM and 64GB of storage space. The battery life will also be greatly improved, and the screen refresh rate will be increased to 120Hz. So there's this part where they say the market expects that Nintendo is likely to launch a new generation console. So expect and likely these aren't definitive, and there's not really much mentioned here of we've heard, we've been told. And really my interpretation here is that they're just speaking on old info, not even new info, outdated stuff. And so keep that in mind as I bring up some sources that have provided contradictory information to what's being discussed here in this article. So firstly, we have Necrofelipe from Universal Nintendo, the editor-in-chief of Universal Nintendo. And so this is what they said in relation to some of the Switch 2 specs a few months ago. Now, this is translated from Portuguese by Google, keep that in mind. From my sources now, the version of DLSS shown behind closed doors by the Nintendo Switch 2 tech demo was 3.1 and not 3.5, as reported or pointed out by Eurogamer. Ray tracing is indeed possible, and the RAM I was told was 12GB for consumer. Rumor. So here, Necrofelipe is saying that he was told that the RAM was 12GB for consumer. And so this is very interesting because consumer, what he's suggesting there is that this is not just for the dev kits, right? Then sometimes dev kits might have more RAM, more internal storage, things of that nature. So him clarifying that this is for the consumer suggests otherwise. And this goes against what we're hearing from this Taiwanese website. But then we have this other source here, Red Gaming Tech, that said that they heard that the Switch 2 would be having 12GB of RAM and also somewhere between 256 to 512GB of internal storage. So 12GB of RAM, 256 to 512GB of internal storage sounds very different from what we're hearing here. But then also Nate the Hate put out a podcast a few months ago as well, where he also said that he had heard that the Switch 2 could have up to 512GB of internal storage. So Necrofelipe and Red Gaming Tech said they heard 12GB of RAM. And Red Gaming Tech also heard 256 to 512GB of internal storage, and Nate the Hate also heard up to 512GB of internal storage. So these are different sources that have shown to know things about what's to happen in the future. And while there's no such thing as everyone being 100% right about everything, these are things they're hearing, things are subject to change, this info is still what the expectation has been. And here, in response to this latest report, and I say that with quotes, Necrofelipe says, the Taiwan Economic Forum published speculation on their part and not a rumor based on any source. This is completely disposable. And so my thoughts are is that, yeah, we probably should not make much of this latest information from this Taiwanese website. I don't really believe it. I believe the other sources. Especially because when you look at what's being said, it's not even really being scripted as a report or something they've heard, just speculation that is dropping details without much substantial explanation. And so I'm not concerned. I don't think there's really much reason for controversy here. Would I want the Switch to have better battery life? Sure. Would I want the screen to be a 120Hz screen? That would be nice. But what I think is more important is a battery life that's about the same, a screen that gets up to 60 frames per second. It doesn't need 120. And having better RAM to better take advantage of the DLSS features and having better resolution, just overall performance across the board, and also facilitating better third-party ports, along with better internal storage, which would also facilitate better third-party ports, and just more convenience for the user. I think that's just more important. So if Nintendo's prioritized something, it's gotta be RAM and internal storage as opposed to a 120Hz screen and a better battery life. Keeping it about the same, I think, would be a huge win. And just to make myself extra clear here, I'm not saying I wouldn't want a better battery life in theory. Of course, I would want a better battery life. But a better battery life at what cost? A smaller screen? Less resolution? Worse frame rate? Not too many third-party games because the system's not power enough to run them? If they can up the ante visually and performance-wise to a significant enough of a margin that we have some solid third-party games, as we've heard are coming, like Monster Hunter Wilds, for example, while still retaining a form factor that is similar, if not a little more comfortable and better, and also a similar battery life that was already good enough, that to me would be the bigger win. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. This is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care.